On this edition of Read with Ronald, I read Ernest J. A Gathering of Old Men, and watched the 1987 movie based on it. Before we get into this, I want to let you know that I'm delving all into this plot and what's going on with it. So if you don't want that, if you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and feel free to click off here. And thanks for watching up to this point. And who knows? Who knows? If you maybe decide that one day you want to come back and see what I have to say after you've read the book or watched the movie, feel free.
First published in 1983, Ernest J. Gaines' A Gathering of Old Men follows several elderly black men in 1970s Louisiana who decide to take a stand against racial injustice and protect one of their own after he presumably shoots and kills a Cajun man in his yard. The book examined themes of racism and social class and how the two intersect.
So how I got this book was back in November, when I was looking for a black man to put on for the book swap I did with Tati back in December. I was looking, and if you know, then you know which disappointment was chosen for that book swap to be the attempt to put on for black men. But during November, when I was looking for a book to use in that book swap to put on for black men, I came across Ernest J. Gaines and his books, and the book I considered using was In My Father's House. But I decided against it because I wanted to use the disappointment instead, because somebody lied and said it was like Waiting to Exhale. So that's why I chose that book instead of going with In My Father's House. But what ended up happening was, after we read the disappointment, I was like, no, we need to try this again. So I went on the search again. And of course, I came across Ernest J. Gaines and his works again. And the one I was looking at was In My Father's House. But while I was looking at that one, I looked at this one too, A Gathering of Old Men, and I read the plot for it, and I was like, this sounds really interesting. So I bought it, and that's how I got the book. Today is February 22nd. I've started reading A Gathering of Old Men. It starts with this boy named Snookum, whose real name is George Eliot Jr. Snookum, he's sitting at the table eating with his family. This girl named Candy, she comes to the house and she's calling for their grandmother, and Snookum goes to answer the door, but the grandmother's like, sit your butt down. And Snookum's like, why? And she's like, because your name is not Grandma. Your name is not my name, so you need to sit your butt down. I'm assuming it's his brother. His brother, Toddy, he starts laughing at him. And Snookum's like, I can't get Toddy back for laughing at me because Toddy has something on me. And what Toddy has on Snookum is that Snookum, and I'm thinking it's his sister, Snookum and his sister Minnie, he says they were in the field playing Papa and Mama, and Toddy caught them, and so Toddy's using that as blackmail against him. The grandmother, she goes to see what Candy wants, and Candy is the girl that's standing outside calling for her, and Candy basically says, I need you to send Snookum out here. And so Snookum, he goes outside when the grandma tells him to. They live in this place called The Quarters. The Quarters is part of the Marshall Plantation. Candy tells Snookum to run all throughout the Quarters. She tells him to go down to this house, and she tells him to tell Janny to get Miss Merle and Lou Dimes to come down to the Quarters immediately. And she tells him to gather up as many folks as he can to come down to this man named Matthew's house. Snookum, he gets to run in, and he runs past Matthew's house. He sees this man named Bo. Bo is a Cajun, so he sees this man, Bo, laying in Matthew's yard, and he's been shot to death. And Matthew just sitting on the porch with a shotgun looking at him. And so Snookum, he goes to investigate. Matthew tells him to mind his business and go do what he's been told to do. And so Snookum, he carries on. He runs down to the major's house, and he calls for Janny. Janny is the maid. Janny comes outside. She's like, what did you do all this yelling for? And Snookum's like, oh, Candy told me to tell you this and that. And Janny, she not paying no attention to what Snookum's saying, because she focused on him not calling Matthew Mr. Matthew and not calling Candy Miss Candy. And I'm like, Janny, pay attention. Snookum relays the message. Janny finally pays attention and finally realizes that something is wrong, and she starts freaking out. So after Snookum runs off, we get into Janny's perspective. Janny's real name is Janice Robinson. She is a maid for Major Jack and Miss Beatrice. She's freaking out. She runs in the house to call Lou, like Snookum told her to do. She calls Lou, but Lou is out at dinner. And so she starts calling around. She starts calling for Miss Merle. Miss Merle is not picking up the phone. She's like, oh my gosh, Lord Jesus, where's Miss Merle? Why she not picking up the phone? What's going on? Bo is dead. Oh my goodness. She's freaking out. So she's freaking out. She's running to the porch, checking on the major. He's knocked out sleep. She running out to the back to look at Miss B. Miss B messing around in the weeds. And Jenny like, oh Lord, she messing around in the weeds. She gonna get bit by a snake. She just running back and forth all over the house, calling, looking in on the major, looking in on Miss B, calling, praying, doing the most. Just freaking out. And so eventually, Miss Merle, she pulls up in front. She's all smiles. And Miss Jenny runs out. She's like, Miss Merle, where have you been? I've been calling you. And Merle's like, I was on my way here. What's going on? And Jenny's like, Bo is dead. He's been shot. And Merle's like, are you serious? And so Merle, she tries to wake the major up, but the major not responding. So she like, Jenny, I'm going down here to see what happened. You just need to pray. You just need to pray because it's finna get real. So then we switch over to Meryl's perspective. Meryl's real name is Myrtle Bouchard. Meryl, she was at home, and she told her maid Lucy, Lucy, bake me the best apple pie you have ever made in your life for Major Jack, and I will give you the rest of the day off. And so Lucy, she bakes the best apple pie she has ever made in her life, and Meryl sticks to her word, and she gives Lucy the rest of the day off. So she head over there with the pie, and when she get there, she gets filled in on what's going on, and she done forgot all about the pie. So she heads down to the quarters, and she talks to Candy to find out what's going on. Candy's like, I killed Bo, and Meryl doesn't believe her. She doesn't believe her because she's raised Candy since she was about 5 or 6, because Candy's parents died in a car wreck, and so she's like, I don't believe you, Candy. I don't believe you killed this man. And so she notices that Matthew and 2 other men are sitting on his porch with shotguns, and she's like, okay, obviously it was one of them that did it. It wasn't Candy. But Candy's like, no, I did it. I shot him, and I need you to believe that I shot him. And the reason she's doing this is because she wants to protect the black people in the area, because they've taken care of her, they've looked after her, and she's like, these are my people. I'm not gonna let nothing bad happen to them because they've taken care of me, so I'm gonna take care of them. She's white, but she's not Cajun. That's another thing. This story takes place in Louisiana. But basically, she's wanting to gather all these men together so they can take a stand against the Cajun people who have been oppressing them in the area. And so she tells Meryl her plan, which is to gather as many black men with shotguns as possible, and she wants them all to come down to Matthew's place and be on the porch. They need to come with shotguns, and they need to come with empty number 5 shells. This is their chance to take a stand against the oppression and the racism that they have been subjected to. Meryl believes that Matthew is the one who killed Bo, but she reluctantly agrees to help because she's like, darn it, I care too much about these people, so I'm gonna help. And so Meryl goes back up to the major's house to talk to Janny and get some names out of her from what people she can call to get down there. And she also talks to Miss B. First she tells Miss B that Bo is dead, and Miss B like, so? She like, so Janny, bring me my alcohol. Like, who cares? He had it coming. And basically she's like, well, Candy down there saying she did it, and Miss B like, oh, that girl, I told you that girl had spunk. That's why she can't get married now. And basically Miss B do not care. She brush it off. All she worried about is getting her alcohol. And so Meryl, she tells Janny to give her some names. Janny is scared to comply because she's scared that if she complies, it's going to come back on her. She basically tries to get Janny to tell her some names, and Janny's scared to comply, so she smacks her a few times to get her to comply, and Janny's still not complying. So Miss B like, oh, well, I know that Clay 2 got a problem with Bo, and we find out that Clay 2 has a problem with Bo because his sister was assaulted by Bo's uncle, and his sister, she defended herself against him by cutting him up with a cane knife, and he lived, but basically they put the sister in jail, and that's where she died. She died in jail because she defended herself against this man assaulting her. And so Meryl's like, okay, Clay 2 has an issue, so she goes and gets on the phone with Clay 2. And she tells Janny, Janny, you need to tell me some more people when I get off this phone, because we need to get as many people down here as possible. So after we get done with Meryl, we get to Chimley. Chimley's real name is Robert Louis Stevenson Banks. And I'm like, when I first saw that name, I was like, are we gonna get the backstory on why he's named after the author? That's all I want to know. That's all I want to know. He's out at his regular fishing spot with his best friend Matt. They go fishing every Tuesday and Thursday. They just out there fishing, doing what they usually do. And they was out there for about an hour when this boy comes, tell them what's going on. And the boy basically lets them know, hey, they gathering a whole bunch of men down at Matthew's house. I was told to come tell y'all, and I'm getting up out of here. And so Matt and Chimley, they contemplate what they're gonna do, because they've had several times before where racial issues would come up and they would go run and hide under their beds. They're like, what are we gonna do this time? Matthew
previously got in a fight with Bo's father, Fix. They got in a fight over a soda down at the store, and basically Matthew told the sheriff, if Fix starts something with me, I'm going to defend myself. Well, Fix started with him, and they was fighting with each other for over an hour. They was throwing hands for an hour, and I'm like, y'all threw hands for an hour? Y'all didn't get tired? But basically after the fight, the sheriff smacked both of them for fighting, and then that was the end of that for now. But basically, we learned that Matthew is the only one who has ever stood up to racism. He's the only one who's ever been unafraid to stand up to racism in the area. And so Chimley and Matt are like, this is our chance to finally show our support for him and stand up with him. They decide that they're scared, but they're going to go through with it. And they're like, we old and our beds are too low to be hiding under, so this is our chance to take a stand. And so that's what they decide to do. And so then after we get done with Chimley, we get into Matt. Matt is the other Matthew in this book. His name is Matthew Lincoln Brown. Matt gets home. He calls around to find out where Clayton is and get a ride. And while he's on the phone, his wife comes in the room. She's like, what are you doing? And Matt basically tells her mind her business, and she don't mind her business. She start arguing with him, and basically Matt basically goes off and he sets her straight. He's like, we basically find out he's mad at the world because of racism, and this might be his last chance to take a stand and do something about it. He finally figures out where Clayton is, and he gets a ride. He gets in the car with the other men that's already in the car. And this is when we find out that Chimley's name is supposed to be Chimney. I'm like, oh, Chimney. I'm like, where did Chimney come from? Chimney. Okay, Chimney, because he's really dark and he's really short like a chimney. And Chimney, he doesn't mind when black people call him that, but he gets really upset when white people call him that because he wants white people to call him by his actual name, which is Robert Louis Stevenson Banks. And I'm like, are we ever going to find out why he's named after the author? The white people, they don't respect him enough to call him that. So they basically call him Chimley too, and he don't like that. The other men in the car are Billy Washington, who can't shoot for anything, and Jacob Aguillard, who is mixed, and his family, they're mixed, and they don't really fool with black people like that because of colorism. They don't fool with black people because of colorism. They think they're too good to fool with the darker skinned black people, but he's down there too to show out and show support. So basically, they all riding around in the truck, and Clay 2 basically lets them know, hey, I'm gonna drop y'all off in the field, and I'm gonna pick up some more men. So the next person we get into is Cherry. Cherry's real name is Grant Bello. I'm assuming his skin tone is like my skin tone, because they say he's in between red and brown, and that's why they call him Cherry. He's the other man that's in the truck with other men. They pick up two more guys, Yank and Dirty Red. Yank is called Yank because he used to be a cowboy, and he still dresses like one and acts like one. And Dirty Red is, they don't get into why they call him Dirty Red. And then Clay 2 drops them off at the field where he tells them he's going to drop them off, and he goes to pick up more men. And Clay 2 tells them to wait for him till he gets back and wait for them at the graveyard, and then they're all going to walk down to Matthew's together. And then he leaves. They get dropped off at the field, and they start walking to the graveyard, and they're looking around at like all the sugar cane. On the left is one plantation, and then on the right is the Marshall plantation. And Bo is leasing the plant. Well, he was leasing the plantation till he got shot at about 12 o'clock. Cherry's words, not mine. The plantation has been worked by the men's families for generations, and Bo's family, they've been mistreating the workers, I'm assuming, because nobody likes Bo and his family. And so while they're walking down to the graveyard, Billy takes aim at a rabbit and shoots at it, but he misses, and so Cherry worries that's a bad sign for how the day is going to go. And they get down to the graveyard where black people are buried. Jacob goes in to visit his sister's grave. His sister Tessie, who was killed by white men because she refused to not sleep and date with black men. The white men only wanted her to themselves, but she refused. She wanted to be with black people instead, so they killed her. And her family, instead of burying her at like their family plot, they just buried her down in the black people's graveyard because they're like, well, she wanted to be around them black people anyways, them darker skinned black people. Since she wanted to live with them so much, she gonna be buried with them too. Cherry suspects that Jacob has come down here to basically avenge his sister's death and basically make up for how they've treated her legacy. So after Jacob goes in there to visit his sister, the rest of the men, they go in there to visit their family graves and pay respects. And most of the graves are not marked. They just know where their family members are buried. And so they're visiting their family graves. Dirty Red, his family grave is like off to the side of the graveyard, and it's kind of separated from everybody else because his family's not really respected in the area because everyone sees his family as being lazy. They don't really like to do no hard work. And so basically Cherry goes to talk to Dirty Red, and Dirty Red basically points out where all his family members are. And he's like, they would be proud of me because I'm doing something today. And Cherry's like, all of our families would be proud of us. And Dirty Red's like, some of us probably gonna be in the ground with them by the end of the day. And Cherry's like, you think it's gonna come down today? And Dirty Red's like, you never know what's gonna happen. And we find out that the Cajun people have been demolishing the graveyards to put their own businesses on top of the graveyards. And so the black people in the area are having to work for these people who mistreating them, and then they don't even have a place to like bury their dead. And so after the conversation, Clay 2 returns with more men, and he's like, all right, y'all, stand up straight, hold your heads high. We going in here like we soldiers. We not going in here like we old men. Matthew's the leader, and Clay 2's like second in command. And so that's how it's going. So far, I'm really enjoying this book. This is looking very much like a 5-star read to me. It's very interesting. It's like I can relate a little bit. And I really like the way it's written. Each character has a distinctive voice. It's not falling to the trap of it's different perspectives, but everybody sound the same. And I'm liking the way their backstories are weaved in. And it's like, I'm enjoying it. It's a 5 so far.
Today is Thursday, February 23rd. I'm still reading A Gathering of Old Men. It's still a 5-star read. We pick up with Clay 2, whose real name is Cyril Robillard. Clay 2 and the men, they get down to the quarters, and Candy fills him in on what's going on. But he also doesn't believe her story. He knows that she's lying to protect Matthew. He calls Matthew a Singalese, and basically a Singalese, by his definition, is somebody who is fully black. They haven't been affected by the race mixing that took place during slavery in America. So Matthew, he is one of the people who's not been affected by that, and he looks down on all the other black people in the area who have, because he's like, oh, y'all are mixed with other things, y'all aren't fully black. And so while they're out there, Reverend Jameson, he's over there basically trying to convince them all to go back home. He's just worried about his house. He's worried about his house being burned down by Fix and the policy that's going to come from the confrontation that's bound to happen. So he's worried about his house. Everybody tells him to shut up and ignores him and tells him to go home if he's not going to participate. And so Matthew basically says that when the sheriff comes, he's going to turn himself in for shooting Bo, but all the other men start also taking credit for the shooting, basically making it clear that they're going to protect him. And so Jameson, once again, he starts crying, begging Matthew to just go turn himself in and to just forget the whole plan. He tells Candy that the plan doesn't make any sense and that they're not going to fall for it. And he also starts begging Clay 2 to talk some sense into everybody, but everybody, once again, ignores him. And it's some women and children out there also to observe the events. So it's like, it's one of them events where like the whole neighborhood is out basically to see what's about to happen. And so at the end of Clay 2's chapter, Lou Dimes shows up, and we find out that Lou Dimes is Candy's boyfriend. Today is March 3rd. I'm almost done with A Gathering of Old Men. I was trying to have it done by the end of February, but I failed. Lou Dimes drove all the way out to the Marshall Plantation from Baton Rouge because he heard what happened because Candy told Meryl to call him. I'm going to say his name is Louis Alfred Dimulin. And the only thing on his mind is trying to figure out who could have killed Bo. He's not thinking who would, because he knows everybody has a motive, but he's like, who would have guts enough to do it? He sees the scene and he sees Candy, and Candy goes up to him and tells him the story that she told Meryl, that she did it and everybody's just trying to take credit for it, but it was really her. And Lou Dimes, of course, he don't believe her either. And so this is when we find out that Bo had a shotgun with him when he was killed, because his body is described as laying there in the grass, and his hat is off, laying back there behind him, and there's a shotgun next to him. So we found out that he had a gun with him. And Candy claims that she shot him because he was in the cane field beating this man named Charlie with a cane stick. And so Charlie ran up to Matthew's yard to escape him, and Bo chased him there. And Candy claims in her version of events that she told Bo not to come into the yard, but Bo didn't listen. So she grabbed the gun that was sitting next to Matthew and shot him. But Lou does not believe her version of events. He believes, like everybody else, that Matthew did it. And so after Candy gets done explaining, Mapes the sheriff comes. He comes with his deputy Griffin. He scopes out the scene and he tries to piece together what happened. He tells his deputy Griffin to call the mortician, but don't tell them who has died, just call the mortician. And he tells Griffin to get on the phone with another officer named Russell and tell Russell to keep Fix away until he sends for him. So Candy, she tells Mapes the same story that she's been telling the whole time. Mapes doesn't believe her either. He starts questioning the other men that are there with shotguns. They all tell the same story, that they did it. So Mapes, of course, he resorts to his usual way of handling black people, which is smacking them around until he can get the answer he wants. But of course, he's smacking everybody around, and everybody's sticking to the story that they were the ones that did it.
And so after he smacks around like 2 or 3 people, Snookum tries to go up there and basically like do what the other men are doing and claim that he did it. But Candy and his grandma Glow, they hold him back. So he goes to talk to Jameson, and Jameson, of course, gives the answer, "Oh, I have nothing to say, Sheriff." So, of course, Mapes smacks him too. And Jameson, you know, he looking around for pity, but nobody gives him no pity or no sympathy. So he just says again that he has nothing to say. So basically, he's not going to rat anybody out, but he, of course, does not agree with what's going on either. They all line up to get smacked. And so Mapes, he gets frustrated because everybody's standing strong on their story and nobody's willing to admit that Matthew did it, because he suspects that Matthew did it, but he needs one of them to corroborate that he did it. But everybody's standing strong on the story that Candy has established, where basically they're all saying they all did it, and they all start giving reasons for why they did it. And it was at this point that we find out that Candy and her family are the ones that own the Marshall plantation. After we learn that little bit of information, the coroner, Herman, and his assistant George show up, and they try to get Mapes to tell them what happened, but Mapes basically tells them, "Do your job, don't ask questions." And so they say that Bo's been dead about 3 hours, which Mapes is like, okay, so that means that they had about 2.5 hours to put this together. So Herman tries, of course, once again to get an explanation. He demands an explanation, and Mapes tells him, "Shut up, do your job." And basically, if the family come asking what happened, don't say nothing until I say it's okay. So they collect up Bo and they take him away. And then Mapes tries a different tactic. He tries to use the divide and conquer tactic by basically separating the men who live in the quarters and the men who don't, to try and trip them up that way, but it doesn't work. And he also tries to guilt them into telling the truth by using the Bible, but that doesn't work either. They are determined to stand strong and protect Matthew. He then tries to go for, "Oh, well, if y'all are all saying it, y'all know y'all can all die by being put in the electric chair, right?" And he starts describing what it looks like for the electric chair and how disturbing it is and stuff like that, and that fails too. So basically, Mapes is like, "Oh Lord, I'm gonna be here all day." So then Billy speaks up and he says his reason for killing Bo was, and Billy basically says that it's because his son was killed. And so Mapes basically calls Billy down to be like, "Okay, well, Billy, since you did it, demonstrate to me how you did it." And so Billy, of course, because he can't shoot worth of anything, he fails at the demonstration. And so Mapes is like, "Yeah, but you shot him. Okay." But Billy stands strong on it. So Mapes decides to ask Matthew himself what happened. So after Lou Dime's chapter is Ruth, whose real name is Joseph Seabury. And honestly, Ruth's chapter was kind of like, because we didn't really get no personal story from him. It's literally just him observing what's going on. Like, we get nothing from Ruth. I'm like, so why did Ruth narrate this if we got nothing from him? Like, we got no insights, no nothing from his part. So I'm like, we could have just stayed in Lou Dime's perspective, because it's the same darn story. Basically, we pick up where Lou Dime's chapter ends. So Matthew comes off the porch and Candy warns Mapes not to put his hands on Matthew. Mapes respects Matthew because he sees Matthew as a real man, because Matthew stands strong on what he believes. They've spent time together. They've gone fishing together, done all these activities together. But Mapes believes that Matthew did it, and he's like, even though he respects Matthew, he still has to do his job as a lawman, but he doesn't respect the other black men in the yard for whatever reason. He doesn't see them as men. He doesn't respect them. And so Matthew, of course, admits the truth. He did it, but he can't force the others to corroborate the story, and he can't force them to go home either. And so after Matthew says he did it, then Clay 2 speaks up and says he did it. And then after Clay 2, then it's Dirty Red. And then all the others, they start giving their reasonings for why they killed Bo and why they did it. And then Johnny Paul speaks up and tells Mapes that he doesn't really understand what's going on around here. And Mapes is like, "What are you talking about?" And Johnny Paul, he starts going into this explanation about like what Mapes doesn't see out there anymore. He starts talking about how like they basically had a community down there in the quarters, and now that community has been taken because all the land is being given to the Cajuns. And so Johnny Paul is like, the community we had down here isn't here anymore. It's been taken away from us, and that's why I did it, because our community is gone, and I didn't want them touching that graveyard, because that graveyard is the only thing we have here as proof of the people who lived on this land, who worked this land, and proof of that this community was here. And honestly, I was feeling Johnny Paul's whole speech. His whole speech was like, yes, it was here. It hit me here, because I was like, yes.
That's truth. So, of course, after Johnny Paul gives his spiel, everybody starts talking about, once again, why they did it and, like, how the past wrongs done to them are the reasons why they've done it. Mapes, he don't know what to do about it. He just standing there listening. So then another man, Tucker, he starts speaking up and he talks about how the black folks got the bad swampland to cultivate while the Cajuns got the rich, good soil to cultivate. And it made me think of Sula with the bottom and how the black folks got the bottom because it's called the bottom of heaven and it's the worst land to cultivate, while the white folks got the good land down at the bottom of the mountain. And I was like, Lord have mercy. Whatever story it is, black folks always getting the short end of the stick. Tucker says that his brother Silas was like the last sharecropper on that land, and basically, when the tractors started coming in and taking over the land, his brother Silas basically would not bend to the tractors. And so they had a race between the tractors and Silas's mules, and Silas won the race. But because he wasn't supposed to win the race, because he was black and he's not supposed to win, how can a mule beat a tractor? Basically, everybody attacked him and beat him to death with cane sticks. And Tucker regrets it because he didn't defend his brother. He just basically watched and let it happen. And then at one point he says he joined in the beating. And so basically after he gets done saying this, he looks at the graveyard and he starts yelling at the graveyard, asking Silas to forgive him. And so then Griffin starts talking smack. Griffin starts talking smack. Oh, I would never let these N-words talk to me like this. I would never let them be disrespectful to me like this. If I was the sheriff, this. If I was the sheriff, that. This wouldn't happen if I was sheriff. And Mapes tells him to shut up and go do his job. And he instructs Griffin to go get Hilly on the phone. Hilly is another officer, and tell Hilly to patrol the highway and don't let nobody through. And so after Tucker gets his spiel done, then Yank starts talking about why he did it. And he says he did it because he was a horse tamer and the tractors came in and stole his job and basically left him with nothing to do. And everybody thinks he's lazy and can't do nothing, but it's like, no, my job was taken. I was the one who broke in all the horses around here before these tractors came in and stole my stuff. And Mapes was like, well, have you ever heard of progress, Yank? And Yank tells him it ain't progress. He basically says that he did it and he'll attest to it. And Mapes is like, oh, well, will you say that for the record? And Yank was like, yeah, I can get my name right because when my folks up north read my name in the paper, I want them to be proud of it and have my name right. And I'm like, okay. Then Gable goes because his son was killed in the electric chair because he was falsely accused of assaulting a white girl, but they didn't believe him when he said he didn't do it, so they killed him with the electric chair. And so while Gable is giving his story about the son, Glow keeps warning him, oh, Gable, your heart, remember your heart, remember your heart. And so then after Gable goes, Jameson, of course, want to speak up again, but Clayton tells him to shut up. And Mapes is like, oh, well, did Candy appoint you the leader, Clayton? And Clayton basically don't answer him. And after Clayton tells Jameson to shut up, Coot goes next. Coot is a World War I veteran, and after he got home from the war, he was told that he was not allowed to wear his uniform out in public because the white people there were not going to bow down to him just because he went and served in the war. And so he starts talking about how black war vets are never respected when they come home. It happened in World War I, happened in World War II, happened with Korea, and now it's happened with Vietnam. So when he said that, I was like, wait a minute, what year are we in? Because I'm thinking we like in like the 40s or the 50s, but this man like, no, it happened in Vietnam. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the 60s and the 70s. So where are we at? What is the time period? And so basically, Coot is like, I did it because I put on my uniform and I dared somebody to try me for wearing my uniform. And basically, I walked myself over here to go hunting and I seen the trouble and I did it. So after Coot goes, Jameson starts pleading with Mapes to do his job because he doesn't want Fix coming down there burning the quarters. And so while Jameson is begging for Mapes to do his job, Beulah's like, will you shut up? Beulah is the wife of Rooster, and Beulah has to be one of my favorite characters ever because she was like, will you shut up? And James is like, don't tell me what to do. And he started walking up on her and Beulah like, come on, I want you to. And so basically they all tell Jameson go home again, and Jameson don't want to go home. Mapes basically, he talking to them and trying to like figure out what's going on, and Beulah's like, oh, well, I can tell you what the black women down here have gone through if you want to hear it. And Mapes like, I don't want to hear it. And he basically starts telling them that they can't hold Fix accountable for what other white people have done to them. And Beulah's like, oh, well, he did something, like, let's not forget about them 2 kids he drowned in the river. And Mapes is like, oh, well, I can't use the river either. Are we affected by that too? And then Mapes, of course, he tries to counter what Beulah says about the kids, but she's not going for it. Basically, Mapes is trying to tell them, y'all can't hold this man accountable for what these other people have did. He's affected by some of the stuff y'all going through too, but they not listening to it. They not going for it. And then Mapes is like, well, if everybody did it, then everybody gonna go to jail. And Beulah was like, well, you could take me to jail. I've been there before. And Mapes start asking around. He start asking other people if they want to go to jail. Glow says she fully ready to go to jail. Snookum said he'll go to jail too. They all said they will go to jail for this. And so Candy, she of course sticks to her story. Oh, I did it. They're all just trying to protect me. And Mapes basically describes it as the quiet before the storm. And that's the reason I was so like, what in the world with Ruth's chapter? Because it's like we hear from everybody except Ruth. I'm like, what's the point of having Ruth narrate this mess and he don't have nothing to say? We could have gave this to somebody else. But the next person is Sully or TV. He has two nicknames, Sully and TV, but his real name is Tommy Vincent Sullivan. He is a white football player down at LSU with his friends Gil and Cal. Gil is white and Cal is black. They are known on the team as Salt and Pepper because of how well they work together. And Gil, of course, gets a call to the coach's office. So he goes there and he finds out that Bo is dead because Gil is Bo's brother. And so Gil is very distraught about it. And when Cal and TV try to comfort him, Gil, he takes the comfort from TV, but he kind of turns on Cal. And so, of course, the big game between LSU and Ole Miss is coming up. They've been talking about it all book. And that's why Mapes is trying to get this resolved, because he doesn't want this affecting the big game, because the big game is going to be televised and the last thing they need is a race war on TV. Gil, he's very upset and he asks TV to take him home. And while they're driving down the road, Gil basically says he hopes that the black people in Marshall are not responsible for the death. And TV is kind of shocked because he knows that Gil's family tends to be racist, but he didn't expect it to come from Gil too, so he's kind of shocked by that. Gil has TV take him down to the Marshall plantation, and Hilly lets them through because he's like, oh, well, you're not trouble, so you can go through. So they get down there, and Gil, he start asking what happened. Mapes don't say nothing. He asks Candy what happened. Candy don't say nothing, and he asks Lou Dimes what happened, and Lou Dimes says he can't tell him nothing. And Mapes tells him, like, the bare minimum of what he knows. And Gil's like, well, you don't know who did it? And Mapes is like, I suspect Matthew did it, but I can't prove it. And Gil's like, well, if you know Matthew did it, you need to take him in. And so Gil, he starts getting upset. And of course, Candy, she tells Gil the story she's been telling, but Gil doesn't believe her. And Lou, of course, he says he can't tell him nothing because he don't know what's going on. And so Gil gets upset and he starts going off on Candy. And he basically tells Candy, oh, you looking down on me and my people, but we are basically the same. And you're just looking down on me just because you have it a little bit better. Basically saying that Candy's looking down on him because he's Cajun, while Candy is just regular white. And I'm like, not the white people fighting. And that's how it ends. Gil basically goes off with Candy and he leaves. We go back to Lou Dimes. Lou notices the men going to the back for some reason, but he's not sure why. And he tries to convince Candy to take a walk with him. And Candy's like, I'm not going nowhere. So then he tries to convince Candy to like leave. And she's like, I'm not going nowhere. So then Lou, of course, he walks to the back and he discovers that the men keep going back there to use the bathroom. It's an outhouse. So they're using the bathroom in the outhouse. So he goes in there, but he doesn't really need to use it. He just went back there to see what was going on. And so he leaves the outhouse, and while he's walking, he walks past Candy, and Candy's on her way to the outhouse, and he basically once again tells Candy, look, Candy, you just need to come on and let's go home. And Candy's like, I'm not going nowhere. And so when they both get back up to the front, they see someone coming up the road, and it's Miss Merle. She got some sandwiches with her. She get out the car with 2 baskets of sandwiches. She has one basket and she tells Griffin to get the other basket. And Mapes is looking at Griffin like he's gonna fire him as soon as this is all over. And so basically they start handing out sandwiches. They hand sandwiches out to everyone. Merle is fussing the whole time. After she gets done handing out the sandwiches, she starts fussing again about the whole situation. She's like, Lord Jesus, have you ever seen something like this? Oh my goodness, I can't believe this. Like, how could this happen? What is going on? And basically, like, she's like fussing and she's looking at Mapes like she can't believe that she and Mapes have to be alive in the same time because she's really disappointed with him. And she's upset with Candy because she's like, I can't believe Candy is doing this, because she and Matthew have worked so hard to raise Candy to be a respectable young woman. Candy is the niece of the Major and B from earlier in the book, but because they were not equipped to raise her, it was Meryl and it was Matthew who raised her. So suddenly everything made sense to me. I was like, oh, so this is why all of this is going on, and this is where the Major and B factor in. It all made sense to me. It took me up until this chapter, but it made sense. And so then after basically handing out all the sandwiches, she fusses and gets upset, and then she leaves again, and she tells everybody, don't come up to my place looking to get patched up if stuff goes down here. And so after she leaves, Mapes basically says that he's waiting on Russell to update him on what's going on.
up with fixing them, and he realizes he gonna be there all night just like Johnny Paul said he was. And so then we go back to Sully. Sully is taking Gil home, and Gil and his family, they live on the bayou. So they get up there, and that's where Russell is. It's a whole bunch of people in Gil's house because they've all heard about Bo's death, so they're there comforting the family. So Gil goes in there. Everybody's happy to see him. He's like the hometown hero. And he goes in the room to speak with his family. And in the room is his father, Fix, his brothers, Claude and Jean, his sister-in-law, another woman, and then two of Fix's friends, Agus and Alphonse, these two other guys, Luke, Will, and another guy. And they all just in there talking. And so Gil goes in there and fills him in on everything that's going on with like the old men being out there with the shotguns and stuff. And Fix is like, so they out there waiting on me with shotguns for what? And so Luke Will, he tries to egg on Fix to go down there and basically do what they used to do back in the day, which was go down there raiding and killing all the black people. And Fix basically tells him, mind his business, this is a family matter. So Gil tries to explain the sentiments of the old men to his father and basically explain that the black people are down there waiting because they're all taking a stand against racism, and he's just basically the figure that they're using to take a stand against. And Fix is like, oh, really? And so he tries to explain it, but he can't because he's nervous. And so he asks Sully for help, but Fix tells him, no, you explain it to me. He starts explaining it, and he explains how the family's reputation of being like people who go riding in the night and killing black people, he doesn't want that reputation hurting his chances of making it to All-American football because he has a really good chance. And Fix is like, he asks the rest of the family what they think of that. Claude basically shows no interest in the conversation. Gene says he's worried about the ramifications of what will happen to his hog shop out in Bayonne where the morgue is. And so Luke Will, he start instigating again. Oh, we need to go down there, Fix. We need to ride. And Fix tells him, shut up. Fix tells him it's him and his son's decision what they do and no one else's, and Luke Will needs to mind his business. And so then after he says that, he asks his friends Alphonse and Agus what they think. And Alphonse and Agus, they used to be some of the writers back in the day with him when they would go riding and raiding. Alphonse says they should because he's ready to ride and do whatever they got to do. But Agus is like, Agus says no. And he says no because they're old. Not because he doesn't want to, but because they're old. And so then Luke Will starts instigating again. Yeah, basically Gil is like, Dad, don't listen to Luke Will. He's just trying to instigate stuff. Look, it's the 70s, almost the 80s. So I was like, okay, so it's the 70s. You can't take the law into your own hands. Times have changed. Gil and Jean, they both tell him this, that his glory days as a raider have passed. He's old. He can't be doing this no more. Times have changed. And Fix is disappointed in them because he's like, taking care of family business doesn't mean nothing to y'all no more. He basically says how Gil was the family's hope because he's the only one who's gone to college and he's playing football and he was like the family's one hope, and he basically turned soft. And he's like, oh, you're supposed to be the smart one, but you not even making a smart decision. And he makes it clear that everyone in the family has to agree to go down there or they will not go at all. And so then he gets in his feelings and he kicks Gil and Jean out of the house. He tells them, don't ever come back to my house since family justice means nothing to y'all, and since family means nothing to y'all. Gil tries to plead his case, but nobody in the house is willing to listen to him. And I'm like, if I was Gil, I wouldn't be pleading my case. I would walk out with my head held high. But Gil, he tried to plead his case. And nobody listens to him. So he leaves disgraced and everybody has turned on him. And he's no longer the hometown hero. So then they get out on the porch. And Luke Will comes out there. He starts instigating again. And Russell argues him down. Russell argued him down in the house. And then he starts arguing him down again. And so basically Luke Will is like, oh, well, I'm going to do what I think is right, regardless of what you think. And Russell basically tells him, don't go down there starting trouble. And Luke Will's like, don't tell me what to do. And so he leaves and he gets on his little CB radio in his truck. And I'm assuming he starts rallying people to go down there to go raiding. And so basically Gil is like, what am I going to do? And Russell tells him, what you need to do is you need to go back to campus and you need to get prepared to play in that game. Because everybody needs to see you and Kyle in that game tomorrow as Salt and Pepper and show how black and white people can make progress and work together on stuff. Because if you don't, Luke Will is going to win. He's going to get his way and everything's going to remain segregated. And people are not going to see that we can all get along. And so then after Russell gives him that advice, he leaves. And then Sully tries to comfort Gil. And Gil basically tells him, leave him alone. He needs to think. I have about 60 pages left in this book. So I'll probably be done with it tonight. I was trying to have it done by the end of February. But it didn't happen. And I'm upset because it's the only book I had left. I was going to read 7 books by black authors as part of Black History Month. And unfortunately, I did not finish gathering in time. And I'm so upset because I'm like, this book is
This book is really good and it deserves to be part of that group. This book has a 5 for me. I read on the internet, like somebody said that Toni Morrison was like the person who used to write to the hearts of black women. And I think Ernest J. Gaines might be the man that wrote to the hearts of black men, because I am loving this book. I'm enjoying it and I relate to everything that's going on in this book. And like, yeah. So right now it's got a 5 for me. Hopefully it holds on to that 5, because I'm like, please don't let the ending be bad and drop the score, because this book deserves a 5. It is so good. Today is Saturday, March 4th. I finished A Gathering of Old Men. I'm disappointed because I was supposed to have this book done 4 days ago. So where we pick up with is Jack's Tableau, and his nickname is T-Jack. T-Jack runs a corner store because it's a grocery store and it doubles as a liquor store. And it has a bar in it, and he serves people liquor from behind the bar. He's Cajun and he hates integration. And so he keeps his bar segregated by basically giving the black people bad service, because what it was is it used to be segregated, and like the regular bar area was for the white people and the black people had their own little private room off to the side. But after integration happened, the private room hasn't been used by the black people in years, and T-Jack keeps it segregated by ensuring that they won't come back by giving them bad service. And so the way his chapter actually starts is he's describing somebody who comes in and gets 2 Jack Daniels and basically sits and stares at that little room. A little bit into the chapter, we find out that the person he's talking about is Major Jack Marshall, Candy's uncle. And Jack, he didn't want to run the plantation. He's basically left the plantation to Candy to run, but he's a part owner of it. He owns 1/3 of it, and Candy owns another third, and I guess B owns the other third. The Marshalls run the plantation, and the Boton family just works it. Like, they are the people who work the cane fields on the plantation. But basically, Jack did not want to run the plantation. He's not from the area. He moved down there after Candy's parents died to take over running the plantation. But he doesn't want to run it, so he's left it to Candy to run. So Candy is really the person that's running it. And so word has already spread about what happened to Bo. It spread through town because Hilly can't keep his mouth shut. But T-Jack doesn't want Jack to know that he knows, because he's not supposed to know yet. And so T-Jack is in there talking to a guy from Mississippi, and they're basically talking about the situation, and the white guy from Mississippi is like, oh, well, we got people who can handle that where I'm from. And T-Jack's like, oh, we got people who can handle it too. And so they chopping it up about that, and they talking about the big game that's happening tomorrow. And so basically what has spread through town is what's happened, and we find out here that Charlie was a cane hauler for Bo. He would haul the cane that would be harvested up to the mill, and the foreman up at the mill, Robert, expect him to come the same time every day at 9 o'clock, at 1:30, and then at 4. And so Charlie did not show at 1:30, and so Robert went to find out what happened, and that's when he learned from Hilly what had happened, and so he went spreading it around town. And so now T-Jack is, you know, in his liquor store, in his corner store, and Jack Marshall comes in for his regular 2 Jack Daniels, and T-Jack decides to put on a show with Robert, and they basically pretend like they are just now finding out about the situation. And T-Jack, you know, he's waiting on something to go down. He's itching for some action, and they get excited for a possible lynching because they're like, oh, we haven't had a good stringing up around here in a long time. But it's this quiet customer who's sitting at the end of the bar, and he basically says like, oh, those times are over. And so T-Jack and Robert look at him strangely, and Jack, he's not really paying no attention to the conversation because he's uninterested in anything that has to go on around the town. He's not interested in nothing. Luke Will and his gang of truckers that he's called on his CB radio, they come in, and they ready to go to war, ready to go raiding and string up somebody. And they come in and they get to drinking. He come in there and he start instigating. He basically starts questioning Jack on what he knows about what went down. And Jack is like, he don't have no interest in it, and that's Candy's business because Candy's the one who runs the plantation. And so Luke Will is, you know, he filling everybody in, and he tells everybody that Fix is not going riding. And T-Jack's like, that's a lie. And Luke Will's like, what'd you say? And T-Jack, he get all scary because he's scared of Luke Will because he don't want no snakes running amok in his business. And I'm like, scary. T-Jack decides to give them some liquor for free to make up for the fact that he called them a liar. I'm like, you scary. You a punk. And so the quiet customer, we find out that he is a professor down at USL, and he's from Texas. And he basically says that those days of lynching people are over. One of the gang of truckers, Leroy, he's 18, and he's like, oh, well, You need to mind your business. And he basically started, insulting the professor, but the professor not backing down. The professor is going toe to toe with Leroy. And he's like, yeah, I teach black writing at the school, and what about it? And so the professor, he starts ignoring Luke Will and his gang. He tries to talk to Jack and convince him to do the right thing, but Jack, of course, is uninterested in nothing. He's not interested in nothing. He don't want to take a stand on nothing. He just want to get drunk and live his life. So Jack, he's not interested in taking a stand, and he leaves. And so Luke Will, his gang of truckers, they start going at it with the professor. Luke Will starts threatening the professor, and he's like, you need to take yourself back on down to that school. And I know where that school is, so I know where to find you. And he basically tells two of his boys to see the professor out, but the professor's like, I'm leaving. And T-Jack, he's only worried about his regular customers. He don't help the professor out. And I'm like, T-Jack, you worried about your business, but you letting your regulars run other customers out your business. That's not how you make money, T-Jack. You're an idiot. And T-Jack, he worried about his business, and the boys start teasing him about being scary because he is scary. And they start teasing him and laughing at him, and then they decide to leave. We get to Rooster, whose real name is Albert Jackson. Rooster is Beulah's husband. And we learn from Rooster that all the men have not been going to the bathroom like Lou thought, but instead they've been going back there, pretending they go into the bathroom, and really they're loading up their guns. Because Clay 2 has brought a bunch of gun shells out there, and basically all of the men are loading their guns up to prepare for a fight. And so while they're loading up their guns, Mapes learns over the radio that Fix is not coming down there writing, and he's happy because he's like, y'all done started all this mess for nothing. And of course the old men don't believe him. They're like, nah, Fix has to come down here. His son's blood is right here on Matthew's yard. There's no way he's not coming down here. But Mapes is like, oh no, he's not coming down here, and it's y'all fault because y'all pushed for integration, y'all pushed for salt and pepper, and because y'all pushed for salt and pepper, now Salt done talked Fix out of coming down here. And he's super happy about it because he's like, look, I avoided a gunfight, and I can just take the person in that I know did it. And so Mapes tries to take Matthew, and Matthew, of course, he's like, let's go. But everybody stops him, and the men decide that they're going to convene in Matthew's house to figure out a new game plan. And Candy, of course, she wants to be part of the game plan, but the men tell her, no, it just needs to be us this time. And Candy's not going for it. She stands in the way, and she tells them if they don't let her in on the secret and in on the plan, she gonna kick everybody off the plantation, gonna kick everybody out their homes. And I'm like, look at Candy. When Candy don't get her way, she start trying to weaponize her white womanhood and basically start throwing her weight around. Everybody don't take her seriously. They're like, Candy, just move out the way. Matthew talks to Candy, and he basically tells Candy he wants her to go home. And Candy's like, she doesn't want to go home, but Matthew basically tells her she needs to stand down. And Mapes tells her if she don't stand down, she going to jail, but Candy don't care. And Candy just wants to protect Matthew because he's been around so long, and she says that her father and her grandfather have told her that Matthew is Marshall, and without him, there is no Marshall. He grew up with her grandfather. He helped raise her father. He helped raise her. So that's why she really wants to protect him because he's been around so long. But Matthew is like, he basically tells her to stand down and go home. And so eventually Lou comes in and he carries her off to the car and locks her in the car. And so the men go inside and they start talking. Clay 2 wants everybody to go home and give it up because Fix is not coming down there. They have no reason to be there no more. But all the men are like, no, we want to see this through. We want to see this through. We're going to stand by Matthew to the end. And Matthew, he's very proud of all the men. He tells them that they proved their point. They can go home. And Rooster, of course, Rooster, he feels happy that Matthew is proud of him because Matthew has always looked down on him and always looked down on all the other men. And we found out that Beulah might have possibly slept with Matthew, but Rooster didn't ask no questions. But like, Matthew has always looked down on other men, and this is when I realized that earlier in the book, I forget who it was, but one of them described Matthew as being Sinhalese because he said Matthew didn't have no racial mixing in his bloodline. He was proud of that, and that's why he looked down on all the other men because they had some racial mixing in their bloodlines. And when he said he was Sinhalese, I thought he meant like he only had black bloodline, but then I realized Matthew, when he's talking about how proud he is because he's true African, I'm like, that man wasn't saying Sinhalese, he was saying Senegalese. Matthew is from Senegal. So I'm like, oh, he's Senegalese. I felt so stupid. But Matthew basically tells all the men he's proud of them and he regrets being so bitter towards them and being so arrogant towards them and looking down on them because he told them he thought they would never amount to anything because every time something would go down regarding racism, he was the only one to stand up and all the other men would run and hide. And so he thought he was better than them and he feels bad for feeling that way towards them and he's proud of them now. And he tells them they've proven their point and they can go home. And so everybody does not want to go home, and that's when Charlie walks in, and Charlie basically tells one of the men to go get Mapes. So then we pick up with Lou Dimes again. Lou is outside talking to Candy in the car. He tells Candy that Matthew has basically let her know that he no longer needs her to protect him, and that Candy needs to make a choice on their relationship. If she decides she doesn't want to be in a committed relationship with him and marry him, then don't expect him to come back for her, and Candy slaps him. Candy slaps him, so Lou is like, okay, I'll take that as an answer. And so Gable is the one who comes outside and he gets Mapes, and Mapes tells everyone to go in the house. They all go in the house, and Charlie tells the story of what happened. First, Charlie talks about how he's a man and he sees himself as a man. He's in his 50s now, and he sees himself as a man. He's no longer a boy, so he no longer wants to be called Charlie. He wants to be called Mr. Biggs, and everybody agrees to call him Mr. Biggs, and Mapes says he'll call him Mr. Biggs and he'll call everybody else by their last names. And so Charlie explains that he was tired of running and he was tired of being scary. He says it started 50 years ago and he got tired of running and tired of being scary, and basically Matthew used to beat on him for basically being scary and running from everybody. So Charlie said now he in his 50s and he's tired of running, and what happened was he was out there doing his job and Bo was basically picking with him, and Charlie told Bo, I'm not having it no more. And so Bo basically told him he'd do what he says and not to talk back, and so Charlie decided he's gonna quit. So Charlie decides he's gonna quit, and Bo attacks him for quitting. He attacks him with a cane stalk and he hits him twice, and so then Charlie picked up a cane stalk and he hit Bo upside the head, and Bo was knocked out for a little bit. So Charlie ran to Matthew's house to tell Matthew what happened. That's when he heard Bo coming with the tractor, and Matthew told Charlie, you not running from this. You either gonna handle this or I'm gonna handle it, and then I'm gonna handle you. Matthew gives Charlie the gun to handle it, and Charlie is the one who shot and killed Bo. And so then after that, he gave Matthew the gun and he told Matthew it was his fault, and Matthew had to take the blame, and he ran off. And so he's running and he's running and he's running, and he realizes he has nowhere to run, and he gets scared, and he's like, he decides to come back and stand up for himself because he realizes he can't run from his problem forever, and he's tired of running. And so Matthew is proud of him for taking his stand, and Charlie's like, I'm ready to turn myself in, and Mapes accepts that. And so right when they're getting ready to leave, Luke Will and his gang of truckers show up. So then we go into Coot's point of view. Coot's real name is Sidney Brooks. So Luke Will decides to show up with his gang of truckers to have a lynching, and they want whoever's responsible for killing Bo. And Mapes is like, no, you're not taking him. So he tries to keep everybody in the house, and he tries to keep Charlie from going out there. But everybody is ready to have them a shootout. They're like, we not running. Luke Will refuses to go home, and Griffin refuses to help Mapes keep the order. So Mapes decides to go out there and keep the peace himself. He goes to grab his gun, and Luke Will shoots him. So Mapes is down, and everybody starts shooting. And so Coot, Clay 2, and Charlie, they all run out the house, and Coot and Clay 2, they go one way, Charlie goes another way, and everybody's just having them a shootout. And Jameson is calling on the Lord for help, but Dirty Red tells Rooster, shut him up before I shut him up. So Jameson shuts up. Glow is calling for Snookum because Snookum has disappeared, and it's just a big hot mess, and everybody just shooting. We go to Snookum. Snookum is hiding under the house because they got to shooting, and the people that were shooting was Billy. And we know Billy ain't got no aim whatsoever. So Snookum took off out the house. And he went and he's hiding under the house. And that's where he's hiding. And Lou comes crawling under the house, crawling towards Mape. And Lou tells Snookum to stay at his place. And he crawls to Mape. And Mapes basically tells him, Lou, you in charge now because I'm here and I can't do nothing. Lou is in charge because Griffin dipped. Griffin left Mapes for dead. He said, I'm not helping these black people. Bye. And he quit and he left. And that's why Lou is now in charge. So then we go to Shark. Real name is Horace Thompson. He is one of Luke Will's boys. Leroy, the little 18-year-old boy who was talking all that smack and was getting drunk and was ready to go out here doing a shooting. Now he over here crying and sniffling. He done got hit. He shot, and he's like, oh, y'all didn't tell me they was gonna have guns. Oh my gosh. Basically, everybody tells him to shut up, and he won't shut up, and he talking about he gonna turn himself into Mapes. They all start slapping him, telling him to shut up, and Luke Will starts kicking him because he's frustrated because he wasn't expecting all this to go down like this. And so Leroy, even though they all like slapping him and kicking him and telling him to shut up and stuff, Leroy like, no, leave me alone. He basically tells Mapes, Mapes, I want to turn myself in. I'm just an 18-year-old kid, and I want to tell myself in. And Mapes like, oh, well, you going to jail.
See, when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite.
And that causes Leroy to become hysterical. So Luke Will starts kicking him to tell him to shut up. And they have to pull Luke Will off of him. And so then Luke Will, he starts trying to bargain with Mapes. And basically tells Mapes, hey, we'll put our guns down because we got a guy over here that's hit. Basically trying to use their whiteness to get out of the situation. And Mapes like, oh, well, you going to jail. And if y'all can get out of here alive, then maybe I'll help y'all.
See, when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite.
And Luke starts freaking out because he realizes that Mapes is not going to help them. And Mapes tells him that Lou was in charge. So Lou is the one who determines what's going to happen to them. And so Luke Will starts freaking out because things did not go how he thought they were going to go. The old men are not trying to let them out of there. And so he basically is like, look, we just want to get out of here. And Charlie's like, no, we going to keep going. What, y'all out of ammo? I got some ammo for y'all to use. Come on. And so the rest of the gang of truckers, they have decided to turn on Luke Will, and they decided that this is not what they expected it to be. And so Luke Will is like, oh, y'all turning on me. So he tries one last time to turn themselves in, and the old men, they refuse to comply. And so Luke Will decides he gonna go down swinging, and he tells Sharp to look after his wife and kids if he doesn't make it. And Sharp is like, oh no, we gonna make it out of here because all we gotta do is convince Mapes to get us out of here. And Luke Will is like, Mapes isn't in charge anymore, Charlie's in charge. And so now Luke Will's like, he's going down swinging. He's not going down without a fight. So then we get to Dirty Red, whose real name is Antoine Christophe. Dirty Red is with Charlie, and Charlie, he's not going without a fight either. He's very chill about the whole thing. And he's refusing to let them go because he wants to cut them all down. And so Lou is trying to get Charlie to come out and basically give the gunfight, but Charlie's not having it. And so then he tries to get Matthew to talk to him, and Charlie's not listening to Matthew. I'm like, why would Matthew want to talk Charlie out of it when Matthew is the one who's basically told Charlie, you shoot this man and kill him, or I'm gonna do it for you, and then I'm gonna kill you too, because I'd rather see you dead than to see you running from a white man. And then Matthew's the one who gave Charlie the gun to start the shootout. So why would Matthew try to talk him out of it now?
See, when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite.
And so Charlie, he basically smoking up all of Dirty Red's cigarettes. And he encourages Dirty Red not to be scared of no white men anymore because it's liberating to not be scared, and it's liberating to finally be a man. And so Charlie gets up and he starts walking towards the tractor. And when he walks to the tractor, he gets shot down. And that causes everyone to start shooting again. And then after it's all said and done, Charlie is down and he's dying. All the black men in Candy come up to Charlie and they touch him. And they're trying to take whatever courage he had, and they're trying to basically take it for themselves. And Charlie, before he dies, he told Dirty Red that they already had all the courage that he had, and that's why he encourages him not to be scared anymore. It ends with Lou Dines. There is a trial. Luke Will and Charlie are dead, and he hires a lawyer to represent all the old men, and the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis are the ones that represent the white men. And the incident made national news, and we found out that LSU beat Ole Miss 21-13. Gil has managed to keep the Botan name out of it so he can go All-American like he wants to. And so the trial, it goes on for 3 days. Everybody's cleaned up, but they look a mess because they all look like they done went to war. And the only person who got shot and lived was Leroy. And so the news media and all the people in the courtroom, they are laughing about the situation because it's funny to them. And they're laughing at the old men. They're laughing at the nicknames they've given each other. And they laugh at Mapes for being useless and basically getting shot and not being in the shootout. And so after the trial ends with everybody getting 5 years of probation because Charlie and Luke Will were the instigators and they're both dead. They can't be charged with anything, and everybody else didn't really do nothing. Didn't shoot nobody, didn't hit nobody, nothing. So everybody gets 5 years of probation, and they're not allowed to have any firearms or go within 10 feet of any firearms, and that's how that goes. And so the book ends with Candy offering to take Matthew home, but Matthew decides to ride with Clayton home. And that shows that Matthew no longer looks down on the old men, and he no longer needs Candy to protect him, and he has accepted his place amongst the community. And so Candy decides to stay with Lou, and the book ends with them holding hands. Now, my thoughts on this book. I enjoyed this book. I gave it a 5. I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. I really don't know what I would do if I was in this situation, but what I do know is Matthew got on my nerves. Because Matthew was so self-righteous. And the crazy part is everybody looked up to him for not ever being afraid and not showing no fear, but he looked down on everybody else for that exact same reason. That's why he annoyed me, because he's like, oh, y'all always so afraid, and y'all doing this and y'all doing that. And I'm like, whatever. But I couldn't really be mad at them for being afraid because of the time period and what they've gone through and what they've lived through. And the crazy part is Matthew looked down on them, but I'm like, Matthew, you're in the same position they are. You work the same job they work. You live in the same place they live in. The only difference is you not afraid to stand up to the white people, and they are for good reason because they're not trying to die. So Matthew got on my nerves because he was so self-righteous about the whole thing and how he basically looked down on them, was better than them and all that other type of stuff. But he got it together in the end, so I can't be too mad at him. And also I can't be too mad at him either because he took a stand, and him taking a stand is what encouraged the other men to finally take a stand. So I can't be too mad at him and too annoyed with him because he did what most of them men were afraid to do. And he's the catalyst. He just had a nasty attitude, but he knew he had a nasty attitude, so it is what it is. I enjoyed this book. It was really good. I give it a 5. Having finished A Gathering of Old Men, I give it a 5. I really related to the stories of the characters in this book. I really related to the stories of the old men. Even though I haven't gone through what they've gone through or live how they live, or really experienced racism to the level that they experienced it in this book, I still related to them. I still related to their stories. I still related to how they felt. And the one question I kept asking myself while reading this book was, what would I do if I was in their shoes? Would I do the same thing? Would I put myself in their position? Taking a stand against racism is never an issue for me. But it's like, would I take a stand against it the way they did in this book? So that's kind of the question that this book had me asking myself. And that's the sign of a good book, when it makes you think about what you would do if you was in the characters' positions. This is one of them books I'm going to have to keep reading as I get older and older and see if I relate more and more to the characters as I get closer to their ages. But with that being said, I am now going to go watch the movie.
A Gathering of Old Men was adapted into a television film in 1987, sometimes known under the title Murder on the Bayou. It was written by Charles Fuller and directed by German director Volker Schlondorf. It starred Louis Gossett Jr., Holly Hunter, and Richard Widmark, and released on May 10, 1987. Gossett was nominated for an Emmy for his portrayal of Matthew.
Now, before I watch this movie, I want to talk about my preconceived notions of it. My preconceived notions, I don't have any, because I didn't even know this was a movie until I started reading the book. And then when I was doing research for this video, I found out that there was a movie. I was like, wait, there's a movie? They made a movie based on the book? So I don't know nothing about this movie because I didn't even know there was a movie. I found out while reading the book. That's my only preconceived notion of it, is the fact that I didn't even know it existed. From what I was able to learn about the movie, it's apparently super faithful to the book. So that's a plus. As far as adaptation goes, I just hope it's a good movie. That's all I'm really hoping for, is that it's a good movie. This is the way this is going to work. I'm going to rate this based on 2 things. The first scale is how it does as an adaptation of the source material. And the second scale is how does it do as a movie. The reason I want to do it like that is because sometimes an adaptation can be terrible. It could be straight up trash. It could be the worst adaptation of a book ever. But as a movie, it could be great. It could be amazing. It could be a great movie. So I rate it on those 2 separate scales. And I also need y'all to understand that the way I watch movies is broken. I'm a film nerd. I went to school, studied film, journalism, English, all of that. So the way I watch films is broken, so I'm not watching it for to see how much I enjoy it. My enjoyment factors into it, but when I'm watching a movie, I'm looking at all the technical stuff. I'm looking at how did we go into putting this movie together. But my biggest thing I'm looking for an adaptation is how well did it adapt the book and how well did it work around the parts that it cut. Let's be real. An adaptation is not going to be a 1-for-1 of the book. They're going to cut stuff that's not going to work on screen. They're going to cut stuff that they feel doesn't work in the adaptation. So my biggest thing is how well of a job did y'all do adapting the source material, and how well of a job did y'all do working around the parts that y'all cut to make sure that the story still worked. And I'll also be looking for, what did y'all add? What did y'all bring to the story? What new fresh flavor did you bring to it? That's also what I'm looking for. And sometimes I'll be liking the added stuff because I'm like, oh, that makes the story more interesting, or that brings a new perspective to it, something you didn't think about before. So those are the things I'm really looking for. How well did you adapt the story? How well did you work around the parts that you cut from the adaptation? And what did you bring to the table to enhance the story? That's what I'm looking for. I finished The Gathering of Old Men movie, and I'm ready to talk about it. So let's talk about it. As an adaptation, I gave it a 4. It was pretty faithful to the book storyline. They made some changes, some I understand, some I was like, I'll get to it. It was a pretty good adaptation of the book. As a movie, I also give it a 4. Let's talk about what I liked about this movie first. What I really liked about this movie was, first of all, it was shot on location. I'm a location boy. I love when films are shot on location because it looks real. It looks authentic. And then when a good cinematographer can draw out the beauty of the on location, it's just good. I feel like they did a really good job making this movie. Like I said, it stuck really close to the book storyline, so I love when the adaptation is faithful. If it goes a different route and the route it takes is good, I'll also be like, oh, I like that. But if you're going to adapt something, adapt it right. Who are you making the adaptation for? I understand that you want to have a mass appeal, but the core audience is going to be the people who are already familiar with the story. They're the ones who going to want to go see it and be telling everybody else, come on, go see it. Theoretically. I just liked the movie. It was good. It was a good movie. So with that being said, let me get into my notes. Some of these changes are going to be nitpicky because I just noticed them. They're not really like big, significant changes, but I just noticed them and I was like, oh, that's a change. So the movie, it starts with Charlie running from Bo, and I thought that was an interesting start because it really sets the tone for the movie. During that scene, there's this scene where Charlie runs into Matthew's house, and the camera, like, we're looking from the shooter's perspective. The camera tracks Bo as he's walking around outside through the door frame. And I'm like, ooh, that's a good shot. I like that. I might steal that. I really enjoyed that. I really like that shot of, like, the camera tracking him as he's walking around outside, loading his shotgun up. I was like, that's a good shot. And it shows the tension in the scene. Some of the roles were combined in the movie. So, like, the number of men was cut down from what it was in the book. And some of the men were combined into one composite character, and so of course that means their backstories got combined and reassigned. The first character I noticed this happened to was Matthew Lincoln Brown. So Matt was combined with Rooster, and they were combined into a new character called Booker. And I didn't mind them doing that to Matt and Rooster because there's two characters with the name Matthew. There's Matthew and then there's Matthew. I feel like that made it less confusing, and that's why I understand them changing his name to Booker. Now, with that being said, because Matt and Rooster were combined, that means Matt's wife and Rooster's wife, which is Beulah, they were combined. So when Booker starts giving the speech that Matt gave in the book, and, you know, his wife was kind of more like, she wasn't going down there. And so when he started giving that speech and he called his wife Beulah, I was like, no. Do not tell me they changed my girl Beulah. When they first showed Beulah, I was like, no, what have you done to my girl? This is not the Beulah from the book that I loved. Beulah was one of my favorite characters in the book. I loved how spunky she was. I loved how ready she was to stand up for what she believes in. She was one of my favorite characters, and I loved that she didn't take no crap. I really enjoyed her. I really loved her. So when I seen her in a movie and they said her name, I was like, no, they can't be Beulah. They can't be Beulah. No, that is not the Beulah that no. But then later on in the movie, Beulah was Beulah, so I was like, yes, okay, good. Okay, good. They ain't changed her too much. And so, like I said, some of the men were consolidated, and the men who were cut, their backstories were, like, rationed out between the men. So Johnny Paul's speech, for example, this is when I really noticed it. They gave Johnny Paul's whole speech and his whole characterization, they gave that to Yank. And then it's like Tucker and his whole thing with his brother Silas being the one who won the mule race, that's given to Clay too. They had their backstories and their roles consolidated. So it's like their stories are still there, but it's like some of the men are cut. I understood that change because, like I said, they're not going to cast all the men. For a movie, like, every person you cast that has a speaking role, that's money. And this is a TV movie. The budget not that big. So, of course, they're going to consolidate some roles. So, I wasn't mad about it. And then, of course, there's a scene where Snookum is running through out the quarters, gathering up all the men. And so one of the men, he, like, goes to tell another man that's sitting on a pier, we meet him in Matthew's house to do what we got to do. And it's like he's whispering. And I'm like, why are y'all whispering? Who's going to hear y'all? Y'all outside. It ain't nobody around. Who gonna hear y'all? What are we whispering for? And so the next change they made was that the graves in the graveyard, they were marked. Whereas in the book, most of them are left unmarked and the people just knew where their people were buried. It's not a significant change, and I understand why they did it to signify it's a graveyard, but I feel like the graves being unmarked in the book were kind of important because in the book, with them not really being marked, it made sense why they fought so hard to keep the Cajuns from taking that graveyard. Because it's like Johnny Paul said in the book, this is the only proof that we have that these people was here. But it also signifies how poor they are, that they can't even afford headstones to put on their people's graves. Like, they really just have to rely on the fact that they know where their people are buried. Whereas with the movie, having the graves marked, I kind of understand them having the graves marked because it kind of amplifies the fact that these people are really taking this land from the people. Like, graves that are marked is clearly a graveyard. And y'all are clearly, like, going over it to continue on with your business. So I'm kind of conflicted. It's not really a change I'm like split on. It's kind of like, I like both versions of it. But if I had to choose one I prefer the unmarked graves from the book. And so then my next note is when they're all gathered and Mapes is showing up and he's trying to get answers out of them. So he's slapping them around. I'm looking at it. I'm like, these little weak slaps. Come on now. The slaps ain't even look like they was hitting their faces. I get it was a stage slap, but he stage slapped it all the way down here. I'm like, no, come on now. If you're going to do a stage slap, at least make it look realistic. Come on now. And then it looked all weak, like it wasn't really doing nothing. I'm like, no, if we going to do this, at least do it right. Come on now. One change I did like is that the movie makes it more clear that Griffin is not cooperating with Mapes. Griffin is playing like multiple roles. Like he's the deputy, and then when the mortician comes out there to get the body, now he's the mortician's assistant, because they cut the mortician's assistant because, like I said, they're going to cut some roles and combine some roles because it's a movie. And so that made me laugh that Griffin was playing all these different roles. But the movie makes it clear that Griffin and Hilly are not really cooperating with Mapes, whereas Russell is more so straddling the fence. Because in the movie, it's shown that Griffin is the one communicating with Luke, Will, and them and telling them what's going on down there, and he's calling for backup in case things get real. So I like that change, because in the book it's implied that the cops are not really cooperating with Mapes and what he's asking them to do, but the movie makes it more clear that that's what's going on. Another thing that they cut was Billy demonstrating his shooting abilities, well, his lack of shooting abilities. Yeah, that's not important, but they just cut it. They pretty much cut Sully. Like, Sully is there for like 2 seconds, and then he never shows up again. Everything that Sully did in the book, they just give it straight to Gil. And I wasn't mad at them for making that change, because in the book, Sully is basically there as a spectator. He doesn't really do anything. He doesn't really add anything. He's kind of just like there as the medium between Gil, who's Cajun and comes from a racist family, and Cal, who is black. And Sully's just there to just represent the non-racist white guy who is surprised by Gil being a little more like his family than he thought, because he thought Gil was different. So they completely did away with Sully after like that scene where Gil finds out about Beau's death. All of his stuff is given straight to Gil. So Gil does it all on his own. He goes to Marshall alone. He goes to confront his dad and his family alone. And so it was around this part that a lot of stuff started getting changed and cut and added. And this is like the part where it's like, this is where it got a 4. This is where it got a 4. It was at a 4.5, kind of like a 5, 4.5, but then this is where it got dropped to a 4. Right around the time Gil showed up was when the movie adaptation score dropped to a 4, because I was like, okay, yeah, we started changing stuff for no reason. And so another change that they made was to Luke Will. Luke Will is no longer a trucker, but now he works as an oil driller, so he works on like the oil rig. And they say that Luke Will is not from around there, whereas in the book he is from around there and he lives down there, but in the movie he's not from around there. He just goes out there to work at the oil rig. And so they changed it from him being a trucker to the oil rig worker. But I was like, why would he have a CB radio if he's no longer a trucker? And so my next note was, this the scene when Gil goes home to talk to his father and Luke Will is there. And like, I noticed that they bleeped out like every time Luke said the N-word. And I was like, why would y'all bleep it out when it's already been said about 11 times before we even got to Luke Will? But I think that was just the personal preference of the person who uploaded it, and they just wanted to cut out those words because they deemed them offensive. But I'm like, you missed some. And then Salt and Pepper, the whole Salt and Pepper storyline, that's played down in the movie. It's important to Gil because he wants to go all-American, but Mapes talking about how Salt and Pepper being like the reason that Fix is not coming down there, that's cut. So it's like Salt and Pepper is played down in the movie. They don't even really focus on the big game that much. Like, they mention it one time when Gil is talking about he wants to go all-American, and then when Mapes is like trying to avoid a scandal because of the big game, but they don't really go into it. We don't even find out any news about the big game, how it turned out, none of that. Like, it's heavily played down in the movie for some reason. And so a lot of changes actually happened to Luke Will's posse. They cut the professor from Texas. He's not in the movie. And instead, Sharp is the one who ends up trying to be like the one to tell them, oh, hey guys, maybe it's not a good idea. Basically, Luke Will's kind of backstory is given to Sharp, and Sharp's like, I got a wife and kids. What happens if I die? And Luke Will's like, well, if you're not down, then go. And so Sharp leaves out. So Sharp ends up being a turncoat. Leroy might still be 18, but he didn't look and he didn't sound 18 in this movie. He sounded like a whole grown man. He and Luke Will, they get into it, and Leroy seems like he's going to abandon Luke Will, but Luke Will convinces him not to. And so then what causes Luke Will and them to go down there, they were going down there anyways, but what causes Luke Will and them to go down there is Griffin is radioing them from the location, basically saying, hey, I might need backup down here. And Snookum, he messes with the radio antenna to cause Griffin to stop from calling for backup. And so because of that, that's what causes Luke William to finally be like, we're going down there. And so then we get into the biggest change of the movie from the book. So the biggest change is the big confrontation at the end. Everything's going how it's supposed to go. Charlie comes back. He tells his side of the story. In the movie, Charlie is hiding by the graveyard when the men go in there to visit the graves, and they get to talking about what went on with their families and their reasons for shooting Bo. And so Charlie is there listening to them. But in the book, Charlie was not there. He was gone. He didn't turn around to come back until sundown. In the movie, he came back because he heard those men talking, and it was their courage that inspired him to come back and to set things right. But in the book, Charlie heard a voice calling him, and he came back, and it was his courage that inspired everybody else to be more courageous and to stand up against racism. He tells Mapes that he's ready to go, but he doesn't insist on being called Mr. Biggs. And so when they go out to leave, Luke Will shows up, and he's like, I want whoever killed Bo. And Mapes is like, I got my prisoner. I'm taking Charlie in. Y'all said y'all came down here for Matthew. He up there on the porch. I suggest y'all get out of here, but if y'all don't, it is what it is. And Mapes basically takes Charlie in. So Charlie makes it out alive. Well, he makes it out of the confrontation alive, and he goes down to jail because basically I'm pretty sure once he gets tried and charged for killing Bo, he gonna hit the electric chair. So like basically Charlie makes it out alive, and it's not his courage that inspires the men to stand up against racism, but instead it was the men being courageous that inspired him to come back and turn himself in and not let Matthew take the blame for him. And I was like, okay. But then the big confrontation, the shootout, where the only people who died in the shootout was Charlie and Luke Will, is cut. Instead, we get a standoff where they're like aiming their guns at each other. And then Luke Will decides to get scared, and him and his posse, they just leave. And Matthew's like, oh my gosh, we did it. And I'm like, did what? Did what? Had a little gun standoff until Luke... This movie made me even more annoyed with Matthew than I was with him in the book. Because his little speech at the end where he's like, oh, I was bitter and I've been changed. And I'm like, but have you really, Matthew? Have you really? And it's more so because of what took place in the book than what went on in the movie. But his character annoyed me because he's like, oh, I was bitter and I was looking down on y'all and I was proud to be African. And that's great. I'm glad you were proud to be African. But you looking down on the other black people in the quarters, but you live with them. You're living in the quarters with them. You do the same job they do. You're part of the community. And you looking down on them because, oh, I'm pure-blooded, true African. It's not a single drop of white blood in my bones. And because I'm the only one willing to stand up to racism, I'm like, oh, Lord. Matthew got on my nerve in the book, and he got on my nerve in the movie. So it's kind of like the ending was changed. I guess because Charlie and Luke Will didn't die, they decided to kill Corinne off instead. I'm like, this is the most random death. What reason do we have to kill Corinne? For what? She was barely there to begin with. Like, she barely there. She barely had lines. Corinne's only importance in the book really was that she had been there long enough to see like everything that the men was talking about. She'd been there about as long as Matthew had been there. But we don't get none of that in the movie. So I'm like, what is the significance of Corinne's death if we don't really have nothing about her? We ain't even learn her name till Candy walking there talking about some Corinne, and Corinne ain't respond. I'm like, so we done killed Corinne off, I guess, to make up for the fact that Charlie and Luke Will made it out alive. And so because the shootout is cut and nobody got shot except Bo, the court case is cut and the big game is cut. So we don't find out the outcome of the big game, and there's no court case. And so let me talk about why this was the most anticlimactic thing in this movie. The whole reason Luke, Will, and them was going down there was because Fix was not going down there. And they was like, well, if Fix not gonna do it, we gonna do it. So they go down there. Hey, let me say this. Russ still kind of like was on the fence because he still encouraged Gil to go down there and play in the big game and basically inspire change by playing with Cal down there in the big game. But since that never pans out, we don't know if Gil did it or not. That's the last we see of him. And so Luke Will, he go down there, and when they get down there, then all of a sudden he get all scared and he like, I'll be back. I'll be back. This ain't over, Matthew. And then he gets in the car and he drives off because all the men are down there with guns. And his posse like, oh my gosh, he gonna shoot us. They gonna shoot us. But I'm like, y'all knew they were down there with guns. Gil told y'all it's these old black men around Fix's age down there with guns, waiting on Fix, like they ready to go to war. And y'all went down there with this knowledge. Y'all knew. So why are y'all acting dazed and confused now that y'all get down there and y'all see these men with these guns? Y'all knew they had guns. Gil told y'all they had guns. Y'all knew. Griffin told y'all over the radio they had guns. And I'm like, this is why the movie got a 4 for me. Because I'm like, when I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, if I had watched this movie having not read the book, would I have liked this confrontation? And the answer to that is no. Because it's like, y'all did all this for what? Y'all went down there for what? I'm conflicted on it because they went down there with the knowledge that these men had guns, but y'all went down there anyways, and then got down there and act all dazed and confused when y'all realized these men had guns. At the same time, I'm like, I understand why they made the change, because it's like, it's supposed to inspire this message of, oh, when we as black people come together and we stand against racism, racism doesn't win because racism is cowardly. And when you stand up against racism, they turn coward and they run away. And I'm like, I like that message. However, the whole reason these men have gathered is because they're anticipating a shootout with Fix. When Mapes tells them Fix is not coming down there, they're like, Fix has to come. We prepared to go to war. We prepared for a shootout. And so it's like, we did all this for what? To not have a shootout? And so when Matthew's like, oh my gosh, we did it. I'm like, what did you do, Matthew? You ain't do nothing. It's like a more happier celebration ending type of thing. We stood up to racism. We succeeded. So I understand them doing that for the ending. But I feel like it's anticlimactic because it's like the whole thing was leading up to this confrontation. And the confrontation is basically just a standoff with us holding guns and basically showing we not going down without a fight. And then Luke will turns tail and leave. And I'm like, okay. And so basically the only people who ended up dying in the movie was Bo and Corinne. And what reason did Corinne have to die? For what? What did she die for? She had no relevance to the movie plot. She barely had relevance to the book plot. But overall, I gave this adaptation a 4, and I gave the movie a 4. I guess it's just a 4 all the way across. I liked it. I felt like it did justice to the book. I felt like it was good. It got its message across clear. I think they did a good enough job adapting it. Thank you for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to give it a like, comment, and subscribe. And be sure to check out more content on my channel, and I'll see you next time.